Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. Well, hello, and welcome to another special guest episode. I am so excited today to be talking to Dr. Siobhan Key, who is a fellow podcaster who I've actually been listening to for a number of years now. So it's really wonderful to get to connect. Siobhan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't follow you like I do, will you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. So I'm Siobhan Key. I'm a family physician and an obesity medicine physician. And I also coach women physicians on eating mainly, really how to go from feeling really out of control with food, worrying about your weight, to having ease with it.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that
So
it has to be hard and it has
important.
to take work. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit. So we usually start off the conversation here with really talking about our experiences with burnout and overwhelm, because it's not something I feel like we have talked about enough. We haven't shared our stories. We know all the terrible statistics about physician burnout, but the stories are really what matters. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting when I think back to my early years of practice, I think burnout was like an accepted normal state. Like I remember I'd be working and then I would just hit the wall and be like, I can't keep going. And so then I would claw stuff back, feel a little bit better. And then I'm like, oh yeah, no, sure, I can do that. I'm feeling okay. And then, take all the stuff on again. And so it was this constant like up and down of burnout. And that was before kids. And then I really got into burnout when I was, once I had kids. I had twins, and I did some probably unwise stuff. Like I studied for and wrote my Emerge exam. I was already practicing, but we could challenge the exam after we'd practiced in Emerge for enough years. So I wrote my Emerge exam when my twins were 14 months old, which felt like a smart thing. And I remember thinking I had to do it then because delaying it another year would have been just unimaginable in some form. I don't even know now why. But in retrospect, it was not a great plan or idea. And so I actually, after that, I ended up in a depression, and I think probably had some postpartum depression before that and just kept forcing myself through. And I just remember like those early years when the kids were little, and then we had 3 and a bit years later, we had our son, and I was doing office, I was doing obstetrics, I was doing Emerge. I stopped that a little bit after we had our son, as well as like inpatient care. And like it's really a lot when you say it out loud, but it felt like what I had to do. And so I just remember those days and years of just trying to get through. And like I remember thinking about being on the hamster wheel, like waking up and being like, all right, well, here we go. Here we go again. And finishing the day, feeling kind of the same. And in 2016, it got to the point where I was in a tough spot. Like I wasn't getting my notes done during the week. So then my weekends were all about, okay, I need to sit down and do those notes. And then I'd like get up early on a Sunday morning because I couldn't, heaven forbid, I take time out from my kids on the weekend in order to write notes. So I'd like get up at like 5 a.m. to try and do all my notes. And then Sunday night, I would just have like this extreme anxiety about the fact that another week was starting.
Yeah.
And for me, one of the biggest struggles that all of this created was I was completely out of control of my eating. And I was so frustrated at myself about the fact that I was out of control with my eating, the fact that I could see my weight going up. I'd had gestational diabetes. I knew I was going to develop diabetes down the road. It wasn't even like a question mark. It was like one of those things of, I don't really want to go see my doctor because I don't want to actually find out I have it right now, because I really need to change this before I get an official label. And yet I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
And it was so, am I allowed to swear on your podcast?
Go for it.
Okay. If you don't want the swear word, I'll say flipping.
Turn the volume down, everyone, if you've got kids.
It's just so flippin' frustrating. And you can just edit that for what I actually was thinking it was, but like so frustrating. And I hear this from so many physicians. I'm sure you do too. Of like, here I am, like I am incredibly successful by a lot of means, meaning like got through medical school, juggling these multiple roles,
kids,
and yet I can't stop going through a drive-through. And the French fries at the drive-through are controlling me to the point where it would be like 10 a.m. in my office day. And I would start thinking about, okay, when, like, it's okay, Siobhan, at lunch, we'll sneak out and we'll go to the drive-through. And I felt like I would be in patient encounters and my brain would be thinking about that. That's how bad it got. And I thought it was a food issue, but honestly, it was how I was living my life and a burnout issue that was unrecognized. Because I wouldn't have said, at that point in 2016, I realized I was burnt out. But a lot of the years I was probably operating in burnout without recognizing that I was burnt out. I just thought that this is what I was and this is the way it should be. And I also thought, and I think this is really important for anybody, any physicians who are experiencing burnout, I thought I had no choice in the matter. And that perpetuates the burnout.
Yeah. And I can resonate with that, just thinking back to some of those same years when my kids were small as well. And, a Sunday afternoon would hit and I would just feel compelled, like I got to get out of here. Right. And I would go and like have like a mocha and a cookie, and I would go shopping, usually the drugstore. I didn't need anything, but it was just this, like, it was this compelling urge to go and have something good before the week started. And I couldn't understand at the time very well. I was like, why am I in this cycle? But it's the same kind of thing of like, when we are connected to something, right? Going to get French fries, going to get something, sugary, going to like compulsively shop, right? Because you're just like, I want something good. It isn't about the thing
too, right? Like, there were a lot of times I just wanted to have fun and I had no idea how to have fun anymore.
Right. But food was accessible. Food was easy, right? It was easy to get. You could afford it, right? And
felt indulgent, spontaneous.
Yeah. And we all have to eat.
Getting away with something.
Right.
Which is fun.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that comes up so often, and we have all this shame around it, right? Because even though it's a common experience for us as physicians, especially, think about working parent physicians, right? Or if you've got some other caregiver responsibilities that you have at home, you're putting so much in at work. You're putting so much in at home and caring for other people. You're always falling last on the list. But you can get these little dopamine hits, with the sugar, salt, alcohol, your phone, like whatever that is for you. And that can feel like the only thing that feels good. Yeah. And food is socially acceptable.
To a point.
I
really thought that the type of eating I was doing was not socially acceptable.
Yeah.
And I think probably a lot of people listening resonate with that. I think sometimes there's like this level that is felt to be socially acceptable. And then there's this extra stuff that goes on the back that you don't want to show anybody because you feel it's not. Or I remember too, like things like it being up in the middle of the night in LDR, and they would open up bags of chips and have bowls of chips. And I would, you're sitting there waiting for a delivery, you can't leave because the strip's not totally normal, all that stuff. And afterwards I would be like, oh my gosh, did I eat that whole bowl? Like, and I had these like exaggerated, I don't even know if I did, but this feeling of like, how to describe it, but this feeling like I'm this person that just comes in and eats everybody else's food. and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like,
and
you didn't ever bring the bags of chips
yeah,
with
and
you
look at Dr.
if you
Key.
emptied
There
it.
she goes eating the whole bowl of chips again. Like, it felt, I don't think I actually was, but it felt like that.
Yeah.
And again, the way I ultimately what I figured out, I spent so many years trying to figure out the French fries thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I couldn't figure out why it was so tempting. But ultimately, it really was the only form of self-care. It was the
Mhm.
only time of the day that I was getting between like getting kids up, getting out the door, getting to the office, doing all those things, hospital if I needed to go there,
Yeah.
and then coming home. And as we know, especially when your kids are little, you come home and you are like on again.
Right.
You can't collapse and
Literally with little people hanging off of you
touch
sometimes.
people touching you all the time
Yes.
when you get home. After a
Yeah.
day of being like a little overstimulated from
Yeah.
seeing patient after
And
patient,
making noises
and
at
then
you.
people just want to touch you. You're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
um, and it was the only break I got. It was
Yeah.
time where I was alone. Nobody was talking to me. Nobody was touching me. I could listen to some music. I had a reason for being there because there was always
Mhm.
this, well, I have to go eat some lunch and I didn't pack
Right.
lunch and I have no time. So
Right.
this is my option. Um, and that's why it felt so good. And until I understood that and I started changing those patterns, I never would have been able to figure it out.
Yeah. Well,
Because
and tell
just
us
try
a
not
little
to
bit,
never worked.
kind of in your experience, your own experience and, in the physicians that you work with, because, for high achievers like ourselves, I think we often fall into that perfectionism pattern, right? Where we might have, this problem with French fries or, with sugar or, again, sort of whatever that is. And we can easily fall into this place where we think, well, I just have to never eat that. I just have to be good today. I just have to, it's kind of that perfectionist mindset. Before you identified, right, that it wasn't really about the food, like how do you see that showing up for people in your work?
Well, I think you start the day thinking about how you can't eat that food, and today you're
Mhm.
gonna be quote unquote good. You and I just recorded a podcast episode for my podcast, and we were talking about this is, you start the day thinking about, okay, well, that happened, but today's gonna be different.
Mhm.
Today's gonna be the day where I turn it around. And I literally used to spend my whole drive in, which is about 15, 20 minutes, thinking about this, like, okay, how am I not going to eat that? How am I going to get myself to not eat that? Okay, when I
Yeah,
feel like I want to, I'm just not going to do it,
right. I'm just not going to do it, right?
which is a
There's no
really empty
strategy there.
plan. Like, and yet it's the plan we were all given, like, oh, just don't eat that food. Like if you're a good person who can manage their weight, you just don't eat the food.
Yeah.
And and that doesn't work when the food is something so important, such as the only 10 minutes of your day that you get to
Right.
yourself.
Right.
Like, just trying not to eat isn't gonna do it because that
Yeah.
drive to have that little break is gonna be so strong.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that idea of I can't have it, I'm not allowed to have it. But then the perfectionist piece, because we view and diet culture has taught this about our weight, is that we need to be perfect to be successful. The only way you're
Mhm.
gonna reach your goal is you're gonna be perfect. But then it bites you in the butt because you
Mhm.
end up where you start, like if I use myself as the example, you start the day saying, okay, today's the day. We're not doing the Wendy's drive through. It's going to be fine. We're just going to get through this day. Going to eat our carrot sticks or whatever the heck I packed, thinking it would be a better option.
Yeah. They're
Um,
crunchy, just like French fries, right?
yeah, dip them in some salt. We'll see how it works. But but then because that was the idea of what success would be,
Mhm.
the minute I hit that point where I'm like, screw it, I'm like, I gotta get out of here. I kind of like like I just gotta leave and
Yeah.
I've got to go. Um, I was then failing.
Yeah.
And and you end up, if we have a perfectionist view on our weight and our eating, we constantly end up in this flip flop
Yeah.
back and forth. And you and I on my podcast we're talking about the binge restrict cycle, which
Yeah.
essentially is that I'm going to be perfect. I'm not going to eat anything that's quote unquote bad. And then dang it, I blew it, so I may as well
Yep.
keep going.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's this constant sort of all or none. And it comes up, I feel, throughout our experience as physicians, because we might apply that same thinking to, any number of areas, right? We might, if we're working on trying to like close our charts as we go, right? We might have this, well, I'm going to close every chart. I'm going to start the day thinking I'm going to close every chart as I go, no matter what. We come to the middle of our morning and we can't close this one because we've got a few people waiting, and then we feel like, oh, I've just blown it. So I don't even need to try anymore. And it's such a terrible cycle to be in, because it's the same problem of thinking I'm either on it and perfect, or I'm not doing any of it and I just go back to the way things were. And it comes up, I feel, so often in these experiences that really primarily benefit us, right? My patient doesn't directly benefit from me closing the note as I go, right? Just like no one else really benefits from you not eating the Wendy's French fries. Talk to us a little bit about sort of what you see, again, in sort of physicians that you work with and in your own experience about that part of it, that part of prioritizing what you want for yourself amongst all the challenges of the day that are other people focused.
Yeah, I think, what you're speaking to is one of the biggest issues, is that we actually have been trained both in a society as women, and the roles that involves, but also as physicians, that our own needs don't actually matter. Like when we think about being a physician, like part of our job is we have to give up our basic human needs in order to care for people sometimes. So sometimes you don't sleep because there's people that need you and you're the one that's on call. Lots of times you don't get to have lunch or have a drink because there's sick people that need you. And it's part of the job, and sometimes it's a needed part of the job. The problem is that we then absorb it into all of our life, and we end up living this life where we don't treat ourselves like a human. We care about other humans and we treat them like humans. Like, oh, I don't want you to wait. That would be inconvenient for you to wait a couple minutes while I finish this chart. So instead, I'll come see you so that you're not uncomfortable, and I'll take on that discomfort, which often when we're talking about this type of stuff, it's often an unequal, that's not the right word, unbalanced discomfort, meaning that patient could wait 2 minutes for you to finish your note.
Yes.
But when you say, actually, I don't want you to wait, I wouldn't want you to be uncomfortable, I'm just going to take on that discomfort. I'll do that note later tonight. It's not going to take you 2 minutes.
Yeah.
It's going to probably be more like 15 minutes of discomfort, maybe more. Like when we factor in the procrastination, the eating or the drinking or things that might happen in order to get yourself to finally do it. And then like trying to write a note and trying to remember what it was that you said, and it's not efficient because your brain's not in it. So we're trained where it's not even that we don't follow our own needs. And it's that we are actually trained to take on a higher percent of discomfort than other people around us. Right. And we can think about this with our kids, where heaven forbid, when I come home from work after working all day, that I say, you know what? I actually need 20 minutes where nobody's talking to me. I need to go for a walk, or I need to just close the door in my bedroom, lay on my bed and decompress. But we don't, because we worry, well, but our kids didn't have us all day.
Right.
And if I take time away, it's even less time that they have me. So we don't want them to have that discomfort of thinking, I remember in my childhood when mom would come home and for the first 20 minutes, she wasn't there. And then she spent the rest of the night with me. So we take on the discomfort of like, okay, well, let's keep going. And it's literally a marathon that we're running in our days when we're in that pattern. And so I think this is the biggest issue for physicians. Like when you say like the physicians I work with, I think almost all the things that we struggle with as physicians really comes down to this issue. Yeah. And years ago, one of the consultants in our hospital, I was walking into the hospital, and I think he had, I can't remember if he knew I was coaching or if he just knew like the obesity medicine and stuff. No, he knew I was coaching, because the question he asked me was, what's the biggest reason why physicians gain weight? And it was like, as we walk into the hospital, and I said, complete lack of self-care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it all comes back to that. It comes to,
Yeah.
we don't feel it's okay to set boundaries for ourselves. We hold ourselves to these super high standards of everything has to be done. And if anybody asks us to do something, we need to say yes, because we can't disappoint people and the
Right.
world depends on us.
Yeah.
And all of that. And then we never actually do anything to replenish ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's a real tough place to be.
Yeah.
Like,
I
of course
love
we
that
struggle.
phrase, unbalanced discomfort, because I think that really hits on it in a way that resonates of it. We're trying to minimize the distress that someone else is experiencing. And in the moment, it's not causing us distress. Maybe, we might have a little bit of feelings about it, right? But we are pushing our own discomfort out, right? Because we know if I don't finish the chart now, yeah, it's going to take me longer to do it. And I'm probably going to have a bunch of work to do at the end of the day, which means I don't get any time for me.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I sometimes have people come to me who've, done charting programs and, haven't really been able to make it stick. And that's really what's going on, is they haven't been able to, kind of really adopt the idea of it's okay for me to make other people uncomfortable. That comes up with eating as well. When you think about, if you go to a party or something and people are like, oh, why aren't you having this or that? Or you should try, some of this. And if you say no, right, a lot of people won't say no because they don't want to be rude, right? We've been socialized that, we have to eat all of these things, or if someone offers you something, you have to eat it, right? So there's this people pleasing sort of aspect to our food choices as well, which is, it's not something we talk about, but it comes up.
Yeah, no, it's huge. Or like, think of the afternoon where, like, you've been working hard all day, you didn't take lunch because you had to catch up on some notes or paperwork or run to the hospital, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then, somebody brings in some donuts or some cookies, and other people are eating them, and they're like, hey, do you want one? It's so easy to think that that's an issue with you and the cookie or you and the donut, but it's not. It's an issue with layers like this, like layers that you didn't have a break and you're starting to be exhausted. Layers of, I don't want to look different, meaning if you're working on your weight, often you don't want to call attention to it by saying no to food. And also, I don't want to offend the person that maybe they baked it, or all that sort of stuff. Like, there's all these layers that actually have nothing to do with the food and the calories and the content of that thing. It has to do with how we've been taught to behave around food and how we've been taught to behave around our lives that actually makes us feel like we have no control.
Yeah. Well, and share with us a little bit, for someone who's listening and, they are really thinking about kind of their own struggles right now with, with kind of food and eating and burnout. What is it that you want them to know that you wish that you could have known, in those? I think you've hit on it a little bit, maybe, of, it's not really about the food, but what else would you add to that?
I would even back up further. What I would say is, if you're really struggling with burnout, it is unfair and inhumane to be on yourself about your weight and your eating.
Mm-hmm.
And we do this. And often when we're mentally not in our best space, we get tougher with ourselves and we're meaner to ourselves about our perceived faults, which weight is a really easy one to do. But it's not fair. Like, if you're burnt out and you're barely getting through your days, and I recently went through a very significant burnout in the fall, and I manage them differently now when I have them. It is not fair to be like, okay, I also have to be perfect with my eating. And like you mentioned, the comfort aspect of the eating. So I'm totally burnt out. I hate what I'm doing. I don't actually want to go to work, but I feel like I have no choice. I'm having escape fantasies of running away to a hotel room where nobody knows me, or just my escape fantasy often was, I'm just going to work in McDonald's drive-thru because it seems like a way easier job than what I have.
A barista is the one that I hear the most often, right? I'm going to go be a barista at Starbucks.
It seems so much less stressful. And so when we're at that point, it is just actually not fair. And it's probably not reasonable to expect yourself to then be perfect with your eating and suddenly make all these changes with your eating. We have to fix the thing that is driving the issue, and that's the burnout.
Yeah.
So that's like, if you're listening to this and you're burnt out, you're struggling, give yourself a break on the weight.
Yeah.
Treat the burnout, get yourself feeling better. And I promise you, it will be so much easier to figure out your eating, manage weight when you're doing it from a more positive mental state.
Yeah.
And that ties into kind of the other piece that's related to it's not the food is when you have something that you're really, really struggling with, like me with my Wendy's French fry thing, the effort spent focusing on the food and being like, I just need to stop eating this. How do I stop eating this? I think of it as essentially wasted energy. The way to create change in that setting is we need to zoom out and we need to change the conversation to one that's compassionate. And so, for example, using my Wendy's French fry thing, what I actually did is I would be sitting in the drive-thru eating the French fries. And I would be saying to myself, oh, okay, I noticed that I'm doing this again. What is this about? Like, why is it that this is happening? And so it's changing to like a compassionate and curious conversation. And that can start even when the eating behavior or whatever habit you're working on is still happening. Then you're going to actually find out, okay, what is it actually about? And what do I need to be changing so that this just doesn't happen in the same way? And the beauty of it is when you hit on those driving factors, like, oh, I need breaks in my day. And you just start giving yourself breaks in your day. The urges to do the habit that's driving you crazy right now really actually can fade away, where you're not exerting energy to not do that. And that's where the ease in creating change can come, is when we treat the true causes and we make changes that make our life better because we're treating things that need to be changed. These habits that we get so frustrated with actually often fade away or become, so much more minor in your experience of them that it's not a big deal to navigate them.
Yeah. Well, I think for everybody listening, I think you've hit on it exactly. And I think it is easy for us to point at our eating or our weight as the problem in order to avoid thinking about burnout, right? Because that feels to many people like a bigger challenge and perhaps even more shame kind of associated with it than weight and eating for some people. I think that can go both directions. But to go back to your podcast and listen to the episode that you talked about, one was about, I think it was called the magic question to ask yourself, but the other one that you did recently on restriction and abundance. And sort of the way that we think about that getting hard on ourselves and trying to crunch down versus asking ourselves, like, what is the experience that I want? If I want to create abundance in my life, if I want to feel better, how do I open things up? Because I think both of those episodes were just an amazing deep dive into that exact part.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's like, if we can actually change the conversation to that point where we're not talking about, okay, I want to manage my eating or weight, and by default, I will be restricted and deprived. And we can be like, I can manage that and also love the food I'm eating, feel abundant, have ease as I navigate my day with this lifestyle, which, by the way, if you're listening and you've never experienced that, I know it sounds like a big reach, but it actually is really, really possible. It's just, we just have to do it differently than how we've been taught. The diets don't get you there. When you can do that, then that whole sustainability piece that we struggle so much with becomes such a smaller issue, because what you're doing, you actually like, you feel abundant. Like, you have a weekend where you go away and you eat a bunch of stuff. It's no big deal, because coming back to like the food that helps you manage your weight feels abundant and you like it and it fits into your life. It's so much easier than the like, all right, well, I guess I can't eat any of that stuff ever again. And
carrots and I don't know.
My dried chicken salad. Here we come. Every day this week, I'll just cook a big batch of dried chicken and get a whole lot of iceberg lettuce. And that's my lunches. Like, it's it's hard. And the way we've been taught to manage our eating weight isn't fair.
Yeah.
And then when we add on our perfectionist tendencies as physicians, our high achieving, we make it even less fair on ourselves.
Yeah.
That,
Absolutely.
if we're struggling, we just have to actually do it differently.
Yeah.
And there's better ways for sure that
Yeah.
make a huge difference. And this is what I love. And this too, is that when we take these approaches, weight loss doesn't make your life worse. Often diets do make your life worse. Manage your weight actually makes your life so much better. And coming back to the burnout piece, the journey I've gone through to figure out the Wendy's French fry thing and lose weight and keep it off has made my life better. And yes, I do still get burnt out, and it can sneak up on you because that's what it does. And I still have my high achieving tendencies. I just use them in different areas. But I handle it differently. I catch it earlier. I'm more compassionate. I don't try to lose weight while I'm also recovering from burnout anymore. I trust myself that once the burnout's recovered, whatever eating I've been doing is going to go away, and I'm going to be able to get back to what works for me. It's just a much kinder approach.
And with an ease that's not present, right, in that restriction sort of phase. For someone who's out there listening and they would like to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, and I'm just going to tell everybody, go listen to her podcast, but tell us where we can find out more about you and follow you.
Perfect. Thanks for the shout out. So my podcast is called Thriving as a Physician, How to Lose Weight and Love Your Life. And that's what we talk about on it. All this kind of stuff is like, let's screw the diets. Don't ever be restricted. Don't ever be deprived. Let's do it in a way that makes your life better, so that you're thriving as a physician and you also feel like you can manage your eating and weight. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Siobhan Key, which I will spell because that is not easy to spell. It's spelled DrSiobhankey. And so I try to be reasonably active. That's where some of my perfectionism comes in, and that I think I'm not as active as I should be, but I reels and stuff to give you extra little motivation. And then my website is weightsolutionsforphysicians.ca. So if you want to head over there and just kind of read more and about me and stuff, that's where you can find me too.
That's great. And we'll have links to all that in the show notes so people can easily find you, even if they don't know how to spell Siobhan, which
it's not straightforward.
Like Mellow is easily butchered.
The key piece gets butchered too. Like key is deceptively simple.
Yeah.
So people need to add extra letters to it instead of it just being, it's a house key. It's like
brains.
The Siobhan's too complex, the key's too simple, and we get really interesting combinations.
There you go. All right. Everything can be butchered. Well, thank you, Siobhan, for joining me. And for everyone listening, thanks and have a great rest of your week. Take care.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.